James, it's really a tremendous honor to have you again. Thank you so much for having us today.
Well, I'm always delighted to be interviewed by you.
You have been the chairman of CBBC for 2 years now. So what do you see are the challenges we might face, during this quite exciting, period of time?
Well, I think from a business perspective, it's only just people on both sides having the energy and the imagination to find the opportunities. So for British people, it's and companies, it's understanding the opportunities from the new normal, China's plans in manufacturing over the next decade, seeing what the opportunities for British companies are on One Belt, One Road. Still a lot of work to get many British companies to understand that China is more like a continent than a country to invest in. So there are some provinces and cities that are growing at or close to 10%, even though there are others that are lagging behind because of the different mix of business and industry they have. So, if British businesses look at and can be encouraged to understand that it's a bit like Europe, with very different economic conditions in Europe, in say Greece to Germany, in some ways China needs to be looked at in that way. So from a China-Britain Business Council perspective, we're trying to help British businesses to understand what all these opportunities are.
So, George Osborne also talked a lot about the, northern, powerhouse and how individual Chinese cities might be able to get involved. So from your point of view, which cities in China in particular do you think will stand more opportunity to collaborate with, their UK equivalents?
And I think George Osborne's visit, illustrated that in some way, because after being in Beijing, he went on to Shanghai. Shanghai, which is itself twinned with Liverpool, one of the great historic cities of the north. And then if you follow up the Yangtze, which is so interesting because Premier Li Keqiang announced the Yangtze River development project. Well, if you go up the Yangtze, you see that Wuhan is already linked and has a very active program with Manchester, which is perhaps at the heart of the northern powerhouse. And then you carry on up to Chongqing and Chengdu. They already have close links with cities in the north of the UK. So the links already exist. Both governments in different ways are encouraging economic development outside and away from the capital city, and in practical terms, whether it's the British government or China-Britain Business Council, we're trying to do what Chinese businesses obviously want, which is to produce a catalogue of specific opportunities, to launch a new book with very specific development opportunities across cities, both in and around Manchester, but also some of the great cities of Yorkshire. So I think it's now getting very specific in terms of what the opportunities are there, and we're already seeing Chinese companies taking big opportunities. So, for example, the Hualin Trade Group, who may be building up to 10,000 homes across 3 cities in the north of England, a project that's could be up to £1 billion or more. It's really happening.
Your chief executive, Stephen Phillips, gave a speech recently on 7th of September talking about, he's working to try to get, your members to working closely with Alibaba on developing a lot of e-commerce related, opportunities for the One Belt, One Road strategy.
Some of the things that Stephen was concentrating on in the e-commerce space was to point out that we now need to work harder and more with people like Alibaba or JD.com would be another, who are working on the whole logistics chain that supports the e-commerce platform, because the actual e-commerce, the narrow e-commerce platform part of it, that's the easier bit. But the really challenging bit is to get in place all the logistics for distribution, all the legal and regulatory issues sorted out, and that's what Alibaba and CBBC and other partners are working on hard to make sure we can achieve. And it's perhaps worth remembering that Google did an interesting survey last year of which countries are exporting how much through online platforms, and it may surprise you, I don't know, probably doesn't, to know that in the Google survey the UK is selling more exports through online channels than any other country in the world at the moment. So the UK not only now has the highest percentage penetration domestically of e-commerce, small in absolute terms compared to China, but higher percentage of domestic commerce is done by e-channels than other countries, but also now it seems that the UK is the country with the highest absolute level of exports through e-commerce channels. So the opportunity is very clear, and that's part of what Stephen was talking about.
And talking about e-commerce, in China and UK relations, there is now a very exciting topic people all talking about on innovation and technology. And I know CBBC has been doing a lot of work on how to protect intellectual property rights. And during Madam Liu Yandong, the Vice Premier's recent visit to Cardiff last week, she also highlighted the importance to do more in these areas. Could you maybe tell us a bit more?
Well, this continues to be challenging for many international, not just British companies selling goods into China, all the IP protection issues. So we shouldn't pretend the problem has gone away. But I think over the last few years, some very important sort of strides have been made in a positive direction for both countries. And it's good that this is now a subject that's talked about very constructively and very openly between ministers and companies on both sides. So, and of course the fact that there are now many more than Chinese companies than say a decade ago who have their own IP which they want to protect, so that continuing practical moves and moves for the courts to take a more independent view in the way that courts internationally would of these issues, these are important and positive developments that we want to see continue. So it's very important to and good news that up to Vice Premier level, this dialogue is going on.
So you're saying, British companies are very confident that their IP will be fully protected in the Chinese market?
I think in the China market, like in a lot of other places, there are still big challenges, but the situation is improving. In some cases, British companies just have to be bold and believe that their product is going to be recognised and sell, notwithstanding the lack of clarity in some cases. But I mean, it would be wrong to say that the problems have all been solved and it's easy. There is still more work to be done to give full protection to people's copyright to their intellectual property, but there have been significant moves in the right direction, which British companies welcome.
That's great. And maybe let's talk about, the areas you are very familiar with, the financial services. Probably in the past 1 year, one of the topics which grabbed everyone's attention is probably the rapid rise and fall of the Chinese stock, prices. So could you please comment on that?
Well, I think the first thing is, people have become familiar with this, but remember that the Chinese economy is not nearly as exposed and Chinese individuals are not nearly as exposed to equity investment as, say, they are in the UK or the US. So, very broadly in China, about 15% of household investments is in equity-related products. In the UK, it's just over 30%, and in the US, it's about 60%. So the impact that gyrations like this would have in, say, the UK or US on the real economy would be much more significant than in China. And also remember that in China this is equity investment is very much concentrated amongst a very small part of the population, who therefore will be more exposed than the average. But equally, there are large parts of the country where the direct effect shouldn't be significant. So I think this is an issue that fairly or unfairly has caused questioning about what I think is otherwise extremely able management of the economy by Chinese policymakers. I mean, for example, the way they're handling the housing issues or getting to grips with provincial debt, for example, a very significant progress having been made, and that's recognised internationally. Of course, the stock market handling, raises questions, but these are very difficult issues for governments to handle. But I think I come back to the main point, which is the impact of these gyrations in the Chinese market would not be as much as if we were talking about markets in Europe or the United States.
The president of AIIB, Mr. Jing Liqun, actually started his first, overseas, official visit in September this year, where he said he would really welcome the discussion for the US and Japan to join the AIIB. Britain is actually one of the major Western countries to lead, the, collaboration on the AIIB project. So could you please comment on that?
Well, I think the important point from the UK-China perspective is that the UK was not only one of the first, it was the first of the big Western countries that held up their hand and said we would like to be considered for membership. And now, why did the UK do this? It's because for a period of time, the UK has been in the lead in welcoming China's greater participation in the global economic architecture. So it involves IMF discussions and other things, but the AIIB, as seen from the UK, is another opportunity to welcome China into the global multinational arena and